Well, good morning and good afternoon, my FISMA friends. We made it to the end of the month, and I am super pumped to be kicking off the weekend with you and today's speaker to learn more about the who, what, when, where, why, and how of the FDA's recent recall ready guidance. So if you are joining FISMA Friday for the first time, welcome. You've definitely come to the right place to learn about the changes within the Food Safety Modernization Act and to get expert advice and methodologies, tools to ensuring compliance. SafetyChain and the Atchison Group have partnered to put the series together, but before we learn more about TAG and today's speaker, I just need to kick off a few housekeeping items. I'll be quick, I promise. All mics are muted so that we can get through today's awesome presentation, as we only have about 30 minutes for this session, but we've left room at the end for Q&A. So if you have questions, please do enter them into the webinar panel and we'll do our best to get through all of them. Yes, we are recording this presentation, so please keep a lookout for that replay link and the slides in an email that we'll be sending to you later today. All right, let's meet today's speaker. Some of you actually might remember Mary Hoffman. She's the Food Safety Director at the Atchison Group. She joined us last year to talk about food safety KPIs and how they impact behaviors across F&B organizations. It was a very important and popular topic, so we can send that link to you for the replay as well later today. So Mary, welcome back to the show. I know you're going to be diving into some of the elements, roadblocks, and approaches folks here should be thinking about for recall readiness, but can you kick us off by telling a little bit more about your background?
Hi, Jim. Absolutely. And thank you so much. It's great to be here, and hello to everybody. Yes, my name is Mary Hoffman. I'm the Director of Food Safety at the Atchison Group, or we like to abbreviate it to TAG. So I've been with TAG for coming up on 3 years now. But prior to joining, I've worked in the food industry for close to 20 years. And I've worked in a variety of industries and a variety of roles, just really always focusing in the quality assurance, quality control, food safety kind of space in the industry. So again, I'm just really glad to be here today. And before we jump into our topic, we like to start off giving some regulatory updates since last time we spoke, and there's a few things that we've seen come through in recent times. So first off, we'll talk about earlier this week, the FDA issued a proposed rule to update the definition of the nutrient content claim healthy to be consistent with current nutrition science and federal dietary guidance. So according to the communication that came from the FDA with this announcement, the proposed rule would update the healthy claim definition to better account for how all nutrients in various food groups contribute and may work together to create healthy dietary patterns and improve health. And under the proposal, more foods would be eligible to use the claim on their labeling, including nuts and seeds, higher fat fish like salmon, and certain oils and water. So the agency is accepting written comments on that proposed rule until December 28th. Next up is an overview of FDA's efforts to improve the safety of imported produce. So the agency released a report earlier this week, and it provides an overview of the work that's underway to advance the safety of produce that's imported into the United States. And according to the FDA, the report is intended to help stakeholders better understand the tools that are being employed to make sure there's equivalence in the oversight between domestic and foreign grown produce, and ultimately to ensure safe produce is reaching U.S. consumers. And lastly, the FDA released the first of their food safety prevention strategies to help prevent outbreaks of foodborne illnesses associated with certain foods. So as foodborne illness outbreaks occur, the FDA, through that CORE network, you've seen that acronym CORE, it stands for Coordinated Outbreak and Evaluation. So they work with their partners to determine what food may have caused an outbreak, how it became contaminated. And then after the outbreak investigation is over, the information they learned is used to contribute to food safety prevention strategies, for whatever food may have been involved in the outbreak. And the goal is to help limit or prevent future outbreaks. So the FDA released the first two of those strategies. One is on salmonellosis and listeriosis associated with imported enoki and wood ear mushrooms. And the second is related to salmonellosis associated with bulb onions. So additional prevention strategies for other foods will be released as they become available. So if any of those things apply to you, go and check that out to get more information. And I do just want to add, just shortly before this call started, I saw the email reminder that the FDA sends out. It's time to register or renew your FDA facility registration. So the renewal period is open between October 1st and December 31st. So just a reminder for you there. Okay, so today we're going to dig in and do an overview of the FDA's guidance document for voluntary recalls. This guidance was finalized in March of this year, and it describes the steps companies should take before a recall is necessary to develop recall policies and procedures to reduce the time a recalled product is on the market and to limit the public's exposure to risk. And as we go through the FDA's guidance, I'm also going to discuss insights and recommendations for preparing for a recall from TAG's perspective based on the work that we do with our clients, where we assist them through recall situations and help them identify improvement opportunities in their food safety programs and their preparation for these types of events. So first off, at a high level, this is an outline of what's included in the guidance document and what we're going to be reviewing in detail today. But I just wanted to share a few important notes before we begin. So as usual, so this is strictly a guidance document. So this represents FDA's current thinking on this topic. You can use alternate approaches as long as they satisfy any regulations that apply to your specific operation. And keep in mind that some products or processes do have requirements for recall plans that need to be followed first and foremost. So for example, the Preventive Controls for Human Food rule requires a recall plan for foods when a hazard requiring a preventive control are present. So this guidance might be useful in building out that program. Also important to note, the information I show on the slides comes straight from the guidance document, and then any additional commentary that I add is based on my own and my colleagues' experiences working with lots and lots of food companies, and I'll be sure to make that distinction as we go through, but when in doubt, what you see displayed on the slides, that is what is written in the guidance document. So the first section of the guidance document outlines preparations a firm should make to facilitate timely initiation of a voluntary recall. And we're going to cover these general preparation steps in the next few slides. It was a lot of content, so I spread it out a little bit. But the guidance states that specific personnel should be assigned recall-related responsibilities and possess the authority to take the steps needed to implement a product recall when necessary. It encourages identifying alternates or backup personnel for each of the roles on the recall team. Additionally, those personnel should be trained on their responsibilities and specifically on their role in a recall situation. And interesting, the guidance considers mock recalls part of the training and encourages companies to establish metrics based on the results of a mock or an actual recall, so you can be using that information to continually improve your recall plan. And as an aside, so from what I've seen, most companies do have a recall plan in place and they do identify their recall team, and they'll list the individual's names, their contact information, and their roles in the recall situation. An issue that we sometimes see is that the contact information listed in the plan is outdated, so maybe people left the company or they switched roles. And I know you probably have multiple teams working on, multiple different plans, your recall plan and your business continuity plan and your food safety team. So I know that it can be kind of a full-time job itself just to keep up with those. I usually recommend just keep one master list separately and just reference that list within your actual policies and programs. That way, when changes happen, you just have to update that one list once instead of going into each individual program. But another thing that we see as sort of a gap is that there's not always backups listed for all of the recall team roles. And it's something that we also really highly recommending taking the time to do. Unfortunately, recall situations have a habit of occurring late on a Friday afternoon, or maybe when a critical team member is on vacation. So having a full team train on what to do if the time comes is really important, and it's time well spent. Make sure those backups are also fully trained and have them participating in the recall exercises whenever possible. And another improvement opportunity we see is that companies say they're conducting mock recall exercises, but when we dig into them, they're really just product trace exercises. So obviously trace exercises are very important parts of recall preparedness, but they can miss out on testing other critical components of the plan, like the decision making and communication plans, which should also be tested. And you want to stress those to build that muscle within the recall team, including the backups. And we're going to talk a bit more about mock recalls again later. All right, so more on the recommended general preparations from the guidance document. So firms should establish a recall communications plan to address internal communications, communications with FDA and other regulatory agencies, and communications with direct accounts or the public in the event that a recall is deemed necessary. So consider identifying specific points of contact for each of these ahead of time and referencing these within your recall plan as well. It's also recommended to maintain draft templates to help issue recall communications quickly. And you really don't want to be starting from a blank page when you're under this kind of pressure. So the guidance document itself does not contain communication templates, but it does refer the readers to the FDA website for model recall communication templates. And from what I've seen, many companies do have templates included sort of in the appendix of their recall plan, but the communication templates really haven't been used or tested during their mock recall exercises. So during the exercise, we encourage you to have whoever's responsible for each communication actually filling out those templates, and make sure the word mock is plastered all over those documents when you do it. So to put everybody's minds at ease, you know that you're gonna not accidentally trigger a panic if those documents leak out. But having the team actually go through and fill out the templates will likely result in identifying improvement opportunities or ways to further tailor those templates to your actual operation. One last thing to highlight here is that the FDA encourages the use of electronic communications for conveying voluntary recall communications. So email is a perfectly acceptable method to build into your plan. A bit more on general preparations. Your plan should identify any reporting requirements for your distributed products. Certain problems may trigger a requirement to make a report to the FDA. So some examples are shown on the slide here, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with the reportable food registry for sort of class 1 recall situations, or if there's the risk of adverse health consequences or death. So that's one of the examples given of a reporting requirement. Make sure you research the requirements that apply to your organization ahead of time and put that information into your plan, including how you would initiate such a report and who in your organization has the authority to initiate one of those reports. The guidance briefly addresses product coding to allow for identification of the production and control data created for each lot, batch, or unit. It states that this may help a recalling firm define and limit the scope of a recall and allow consignees to separate violative product lots from ineffective lots, and it will help the public recognize an effective product in their possession. The guidance does make reference to the food traceability rule, which has lots and lots of more detail on record keeping requirements for certain foods, and that rule could easily be a webinar in itself. But if that rule applies to your operation, be sure to understand those requirements as well. The last general preparation item is the maintenance of distribution records. So again, this section references other regulations and requirements for certain foods, but at a high level, it states that distribution records should be maintained to facilitate the location of products being recalled. Any direct accounts that further distribute your product need to maintain records of their own direct accounts to make sure your instructions can be extended along the distribution chain. And the guidance states that all of these records should be retained for a period of time that exceeds the shelf life and expected use of the product, but it's got to be at least the length of time specified in any other regulations concerning record retention that apply to your organization. So my note here is, in general, we see food companies working really hard on those last two elements that we discussed, that product coding and distribution records. We often see these tested during product trace exercises, and people are paying attention to, what percent recovery did we get? How much time did it take for us to account for everything? And with good reason. That's great. Obviously, if you're in a recall situation, you need to be able to quickly identify and locate the impacted products. So even though I'm emphasizing don't just do trace exercises, do full mocks, you can't overstate how important it is to also do those trace activities so you can be sure to get your arms around any potentially impacted product in a thorough and efficient manner. All right, moving on now to the next section of the guidance document. And this is recommended procedures for initiating a recall and performing actions related to initiating a recall. So FDA recommends that firms prepare, maintain, and document written procedures for initiating a recall and performing actions related to initiating a recall. So some of this might seem redundant from the previous general preparation section, but really the intention here is to create step-by-step procedures for how each of these actions would be carried out. So the recommended procedures are listed here on this slide, and they include the responsibility and steps to cease distribution, shipment, and sales of affected products, the creation of a recall strategy, considering the potential risk to those exposed to the product, and the strategy should help guide the recalling firm's decisions related to recall depth and the need for additional actions like maybe a public warning. And it should take into account the possibility that the scope of the recall may expand if additional lots or products are shown to be affected. Procedures should also describe how to notify the direct accounts about the products being recalled, including what should be done with the product. So do you want them to return it, hold on to it, destroy it? You need to let them know. Also, instructing your direct account to further notify its own direct accounts about the recall is important where that's applicable. Again, email is perfectly acceptable as long as you have, up-to-date email information for the appropriate contact people at those organizations. The guidance notes that if your plan is to contact your direct accounts by phone, you should confirm the phone communication in writing, like follow it up with an email maybe, or otherwise document the phone communication in some way. So maybe you could take notes of who you talked to, what time, and kind of some details about the phone conversation. Your communication should include response instructions so the direct account can respond to the notification and reach out for additional information if needed. And you should also define how to notify the public about a product that presents a health hazard, such as a press release, if that should be necessary. So just, include that in your procedures, that you need to consider that. If that's deemed warranted, how would you do that? And then, of course, all relevant employees need to be trained on their role in these activities. So some insights on this section, from my perspective, most companies we work with are including this information in their recall plans to some extent. The procedures aren't always fully built out, and we don't always see these components tested during mock recalls. One of the best things you can do to prepare and to be recall ready is to put additional work into your recall procedures. Make sure they're descriptive enough. Make sure someone can pick them up and understand what they're supposed to do in their role. Make sure those roles and responsibilities are really clearly defined. And make sure employees are well trained on their roles. And then practice these steps so you can identify the pinch points and keep working to make your protocols fit your organization. So during your mock recalls, have the team members pull out the procedures and work through them step by step. And I'm certain that they'll find some things that don't quite fit or could work better, and you can continue to make those better and better. The next section of the guidance talks about what a firm should do if there's an indication of a problem with a distributed product. So if you think there might be a problem, and there's 2 slides on this for our discussion today. So first, the guidance recommends that firms implement procedures to identify indicators that there may be a problem with a distributed product, right? So if something goes wrong, you need to have ways for your firm to be aware that there might be a problem. So some examples of such indicators include internal reports of product or process deviation, an out of specification testing result, consumer complaints about a product, inspectional observations by a regulatory authority indicating noncompliance with regulations, or reports of adverse events such as illness, injury, or death associated with product use. And then once a potential problem has been identified, it needs to be properly investigated. Companies should create procedures that assign responsibility and describe the steps to investigate a potential problem with a distributed product. The steps might include investigating whether a deviation in manufacturing occurred and whether the safety of distributed products may have been affected, or whether a product may be otherwise adulterated or misbranded. The guidance recommends a prompt evaluation by a qualified person following established criteria to ensure that potential risks are consistently and adequately assessed and investigated for products potentially affected. And my notes on this are really that second part, the investigating the problem, can be difficult to do. It's hard to proceduralize this sometimes if you don't know kind of the whole variety of things that could or might happen. Some scenarios that you might come up, it may be really quickly apparent that you'll have to initiate a recall. So maybe a supplier will notify you that an ingredient they sold to you was contaminated with a pathogen. You know you used that ingredient without having a kill step in your process, so you might quickly determine which of your products were affected and make the recommendation to initiate a recall. But other times, it might not be so cut and dried. And in the less straightforward situations, we suggest at TAG, we suggest conducting a health hazard evaluation, considering established criteria to determine if the situation poses a public health risk. So again, this is strictly TAG's viewpoint on this. This is not included in the guidance, but it kind of speaks to what they're saying there about investigating the problem. So to prepare for this in your plan, you might consider creating a template for conducting a health hazard evaluation, where you lay out all of the needed information so you can just kind of fill in the blanks as different situations arise. And you'll want to include spaces for, specifics of the problem. Is it biological, chemical, physical? what's the specific organism or other contaminant, the nature of the product and the process, who's the likely consumers, and you're really trying to determine the potential for bodily injury or illness. This could include conducting an exposure assessment for like potential chemical contaminants, where you consider the amount of contaminant per gram and the serving size of the product, to be thinking about potential exposure. Also, if it's a physical contaminant, think out the factors that you need to consider. Everybody goes to that size. What are the size of the pieces right away? And that's important. But what else do you have to think about? Like maybe the material shape, the consistency, the chemical composition. So you can really be doing a thorough assessment of the potential for bodily injury or illness. So we encourage you to set yourself up to gather all of that information together in a systematic manner so the potential risk can be adequately assessed. And then it's important to think about whether you have the expertise internally to assess a variety of potential scenarios. So in some instances, you might need the expertise of a microbiologist or maybe a toxicologist to conduct that effective health hazard evaluation. And if you don't have that expertise on staff, we encourage you to identify external experts that you can contact if the need arises. So maybe this is somebody at your external lab or in an industry group or a consultant. Think those things through ahead of time and have that contact information included within your plan so you can reach out to them if you need to. Once you've identified and investigated the potential issue, you should have procedures in place to define who has the responsibility and authority to initiate a voluntary recall. Include steps for how you'll define the scope of the recall. So for example, which specific lots will be included. You'll also need to be prepared to define the depth of the recall, which refers to the level in the distribution chain. So is this recall limited to your direct consignees, or does it need to go deeper or further than that? And how will you make decisions to discontinue production and distribution of affected products? Additionally, the guidance encourages companies to consult with the FDA while its own internal investigation is ongoing. And you can find a list of FDA recall coordinators organized by product type and location on the FDA website. If you haven't done that already, look that information up and put that right into your recall plan so you have it when you need it. Next, the guidance provides recommendations for how a firm should initiate a voluntary recall. And essentially at this point, you're just putting your plan into action. At a high level, this will include making notifications and executing your communication plan, all of which was covered previously. And I will just add from my perspective that in a potential recall situation, it's important to remember to pull out your recall plan. And I know that might sound silly, but people in these situations are sometimes stressed out, and we see that maybe they kind of briefly forget that they have a playbook for working through the situation. So for me, step one here should be pull out your recall plan and begin working through it. The final section of the guidance document describes how the FDA works with recalling firms to initiate a voluntary recall in a timely manner. So those FDA recall coordinators we mentioned, they'll be your point of contact with the agency, and they'll provide information about the recall process, and they'll work closely with you throughout the course of the recall. They can also help your firm determine whether the action you're considering is actually a recall, as that's defined in the applicable regulations. And they can provide insight in developing your strategy. They can review your planned communications, and they will monitor the disposition of the recalled products. The guidance also points out that the FDA may initiate discussions with a firm about a product problem. So they might be the one to initiate the conversation rather than you reaching out to them. And they may request that a firm initiate a recall if a product presents a risk of illness, injury, or gross consumer deception, if the firm has not already initiated a recall of the product, and if the agency determines that action is necessary to protect public health. So to wrap it up, I encourage you to review your recall plan, considering the recommendations provided today, and go find that FDA guidance document. Build out your recall plan where you find that you might have some gaps. Also, fully test your recall plan in addition to your trace exercises to test out and stress the other components of your plan, like the decision making and communication steps, and then continually improve your plan so your firm will remain recall ready. And after you do all of this hard work to develop a robust recall plan, I truly and sincerely hope that you will never need to use it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Mary, thank you so much. This is obviously a really good overview, and definitely everybody, please do watch the replay of this because this is some really good points that she made based on her experience and TAG's experience in dealing with companies that are trying to become recall ready, but obviously are challenged in certain areas. So let's just jump into it. Mary, the question that I see is popping up here as a thread is, what is the proper frequency to do mock recalls, and do you need to do mock recalls based on specific scenarios like biological risk versus physical risk mock recalls?
Yeah, great question. I think generally we'll see organizations doing one mock recall once a year, and then they'll do additional trace exercises, a few times a year. And to the second part of the question, I think it's in your own interest to change them up. Like each time you do one, change it up a little bit. Don't be trying to test the same potential scenario. So pull in a biological, a chemical, a physical, mix those up. Also pull in, where was the problem identified? Are you working from, a consumer report and you're working kind of backwards from that angle? Or are you working, build a scenario around a supplier initiated issue, or something maybe that could happen in your facility. Just really encourage you to mix it up. Just you're going to be able to sort of test different components of your system depending upon how you put those together. So make it a good variety. And again, we see people doing this once a year. More often is better, but being realistic, I think a good solid recommendation is annual.
Okay, that makes sense. We just have enough time for a couple more questions here. So what I saw, and I'm seeing these questions coming in, there seems to be a breakdown in terms of like, hey, how do we properly and effectively communicate? Do I have the right contact information? Do I know who my experts are internally or externally? And do I have basically the means and the process in place to connect with them and provide that important communication quickly? What are the biggest roadblocks you typically see when you go on site and you're talking to these F&B companies? What is the biggest hangup on the communication plan side?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So food and beverage plants are extremely busy places. They have so much going on and so much they have to manage. And just like when we talked about keeping your own team members, your recall team members up to date within your own documents, that's hard enough to keep up with. So if changes happen with your consignees, with your regulatory contacts, and I'm sure many of you have like GFSI programs as well. So keeping that all up to date, it's just very time consuming in a world of very, very time consuming things where, your time is limited. So this is part of what we really encourage you to be testing out when you do those full mock recalls. Now, I have in my past, I would call those numbers on my list. And when I'd contact people, I would say, hey, we're just reviewing our plan, just wanted to make sure we have the right information. Time consuming, but it can be time really well spent, because when this comes to crunch time and tensions are high, you want to be as well prepared as you possibly can.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to take one more question. There's a lot of questions here, so what I'm just going to say to all the folks here attending, We are going to follow up with you after this presentation. Don't worry, we will answer your questions. But since we're a little bit limited on time today, we're just going to get one in. This one here, if the potential recall is associated with an ingredient, but the issue is found at the processor or farther down the chain, who has the first responsibility to notify the FDA?
That's a great question. So I think what they're asking is if you receive an ingredient from a supplier and you realize that there's something wrong with it and it's a potential recall situation if that product had been out but you haven't used it yet, you do still have the responsibility to go to that reportable food registry and fill out a report there. So the FDA really, they don't want things to slip through the cracks. So just because you received it but didn't use it, you don't really know who else potentially received that same material.
Right.
So
So even your distributors or sub-distributors, I mean, it doesn't matter. If you identify it, you're reporting.
yes.
Got it. Got it. Good. All right, Mary, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for spending the time today. Again, everybody that submitted questions, if we didn't get to yours, we will follow up, we promise. We will also follow up with all attendees with this replay and the slides. Again, we're happy to take any questions that come in after the event, so please do let us know once you rewatch this replay. We thank you all. If you have questions around tag and around SafetyChain, there's some information here that you can check out, safetychain.com, or you can visit tag's website. They are definitely dealing with this all the time. They're helping food and beverage companies get recall ready. They are paying close attention to what the FDA guidelines are. So please do give them a ring if you have any further questions. So we thank you all for joining us today on FSMA Friday. We hope you have a wonderful weekend. And of course, we hope to see you at the next FSMA Friday next month. So take care,
Thanks,
everybody. Thanks
everyone.
again, Mary.
Bye-bye.